the recording.
Okay.
Yeah, so thank you very much for being with us on such a day. But yeah,
Look, there's nothing there. There's a point where you can't. There's nothing else you can do. So
yeah.
look at there's a famous teacher of Yemima who lives in Pardes Chana. His name is Itamar Perlman. So I actually knew him at one point in my life. Anyway, so he told a story that his son at one point was very, very ill, and he was invited to friends for lunch while his son was in the hospital, and he went. So they said, "Why? Why are you going?" He said, "Look, I did everything I possibly could do. I got the best doctors, and I paid private for everything, and I." And he's at the moment he's being treated, and I might as well have lunch. Now
Mhm.
you could argue that either way, but this ability of to be the ability for us to be able to try to be normal and concerned and at the same time is it's very Breslovery, I
Mhm.
understand, but
Yeah.
maybe that's the way to go. I mean,
Yeah.
no,
Yeah.
I don't know. It's not
Uh,
lo pashut. Lo pashut. We haven't had this long a haul since 1948, so hardly anybody.
yeah. It's and the silver lining in it all is seeing the strength of our people, and especially of the young generation, especially.
Yeah, that's why I would like to. That's why the best thing that I've seen in the past week or so has been this campaign by the soldiers called "Shut Up." Have you seen that?
Yes, yes.
So I'm involved in one of these groups. Actually, it's a Ra'anana heavy group, which is creating an Amanah Chevretit. And so everybody sits there and we were constantly sort of like wringing our hands over the media and the politicians that take advantage of it. But this was like a it was like Mayim Bamidbar, just shut up. If you can't say anything, my mother used to have a song like that. If you can't say anything real nice, don't say anything at all, is my advice. And that's
Uh-huh. Yes.
Azoy. Azoy. So this poor lady was not a member of the
She
community.
wasn't a member of ours. But, yeah.
I mean, I understand she was in the car and he just came in, stabbed her, and grabbed the car.
Yeah. That's what I understand too.
So
Yes.
if she had had a gun, it wouldn't have made a difference. She's 79 years old or something.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah.
All I know is out here, it's hard to get an appointment to do Shipur Yeri.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I asked for to get a gun. I mean, at the beginning, right after Simchat Torah, I still didn't get an answer. So, yeah.
I mean, my son also made an application, but he was already in. They moved him into a kitat kanunut. I think that may have pushed
Mm.
things. That was pretty sobering. Also, he lives in Netanya, and they were doing urban warfare for 3 months.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways, all right. So it's 12:08. I think this is what there's going
Yeah,
to be. All right. So let me
yeah.
put up
I
the
know many will be listening to the recording.
right,
So,
the Seder. So this will be the last class, and we will worry about, and in Mitzvah Hashem, we will do others in the future. Let me just uh, from the current slide. There we go. Okay. So when we last met, which is 3 weeks ago, let me just bring us up to snuff. We'd gone through all of these really amazing involved areas in which Jews were heavily involved in Renaissance society, in which they made contributions to Renaissance society, which Renaissance culture impacted Judaism. And the question is, so how does that work? I mean, and in general, this is a question which arises all the time. How and when or if is Jewish culture and even our Judaism per se influenced by the outside world? Now, we got to realize that this becomes a political football, a sort of a cultural political football. What do I mean? Often this happens in Israel all the time. Often what happens is that often what happens is that somebody will bring up some kind of a minig, and somebody will say, well, it comes from the pagans, and it comes from here, and it comes from there, and it's, as if they're celebrating the fact that there's nothing authentically Jewish, everything is taken from the outside world, which is an incredibly disrespectful, in my opinion, approach towards Judaism, because it just assumes that we have nothing original to say. We're just a sponge, and we just adopt from the outside world, and there's nothing here. Um, on closer examination, one discovers that it's, on the one hand, you can't not, if you we've always been a minority culture, and by the way, even though we're a majority in our own country, culturally we're a minority because we're this little Western country, or little country in the Middle East, on the border of the West and the East, which absorbs the outside world. I mean, it's inevitable. However, the question is, so therefore, that we would be impacted by the outside world is normal, and it's to be expected. The question is when, how, what, and more importantly, what not. Okay, so I remember asking, and this is all relevant to what I'm going to say now. I remember asking, talking about this with a dear friend who unfortunately has passed away, one of the greatest historians of halacha in like the previous generation, the generation before mine, and that it was Professor Yisrael Moshe Tashma from Hebrew University. And we're talking about, and he was telling me about a conversation that he had with the sort of like the grandfather of all of us, is Professor Yaakov Katz from Hebrew. And they were talking about influence. So Katz said, of course we're influenced, but the question is how. So for example, if you look at Chazal, they ate twice a day. They ate in the late morning and they ate in the early evening. They didn't eat lunch. So we all eat lunch. So we're influenced. Nobody except people in Tzvat that I actually know some of. Nobody except people in Tzvat walk around dressed the way the Moshe Rabbeinu and the Jews in the desert wandered around. So we're obviously influenced. But then the question is how. But how does that explain itself? First of all, once you would, how does that express itself in Jewish terms, and what does that mean? So sometimes, for example, things are consciously adapted for Jewish use. Or things are adapted in light of influence. So, for example, it used to, because Jews only ate twice a day, that's why Suda Shlishit's a big deal, right? So we eat lunch anyways, right? So what ends up happening is, so you end up having these, especially in the winter now, those are Suda Shlishit. So you have to have parv, and you end up making this little meal after you've stuffed yourself for lunch. So you have tuna fish and egg salad, or some people put the tuna fish together with the egg salad. So you try to adjust so that there's something left. All right. On the other hand, Hasidim, for example, consciously took Western mores, Western dress, and adapted them to Jewish concerns. For example, if you take, I don't think any of us have ever paid attention to this, but in Western garb, generally, men, when they put on shirts or jackets, the left. The buttons are on the right hand side, and the holes are on the left hand side. So you button left over right. Hasidim and women are the other way around. Hasidim make a point of all the men button their jackets right over left, and the same thing with the shirts. Why? Because based on Kabbalah, you want to have the right being dominant over the left. So they have a sort of a Judaization, if you want a conversion or a gerus of outside influence to Jewish concerns. But even so, when the things come from the outside world, the question is how, when, why, and if. When Maharik was faced with this question of whether you can wear, a doctor can wear this garb, this kappa manikata that we talked about, so he developed this entire system, this entire theory of what would you not be allowed to borrow from the outside world, what would be considered to be illegitimate or pagan things, which have absolutely totally, there's no propriety in bringing them into the Jewish people. So he says things that are absolutely idolatrous, so let's say religious in their origin and in their self-expression. That's number one. So we could not adopt Christian mores of prayer or Muslim warriors of prayer in our worship. And then he goes on, he says, and things which are arrogant and which are showy and which don't reflect Jewish values. And then after a long discussion, he says, at the end of the day, there's an underlying there's an underlying common denominator to both of them, and that is a desire to stop being Jewish and to imitate the outside world and to look like and become non-Jews. Because why would you adapt your religion, your religious practice, to what pagans do, what Christians do, what Muslims do, except that you want to be like them? And the same thing with regard to the adaptation of whether it's fashion or whether it's modes of comportment that are sort of quintessentially identified with the outside world and not so much with the Jewish world. So in other words, you need what I would call an assimilationist um, sort of impulse to do so. And in that light, so very nice. So what about this kappa? So at the end, towards the end of this responsum, he says here, I'm going to lead from the last 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5 lines from the bottom, the last 6 words. V'yafeh katavtem. He compliments Messer Leon and Shmuel Modena. Katavtem she'im kenhu. If Jews can't dress like non-Jews, shitztarecha Yisrael l'shanot malbushav malbushei goyim al kol panim. If you have to globally dress differently than non-Jews, im kain, if that's the case, ein adam tzaddik ba'aretz. There's no righteous people in Italy because everybody dresses like everybody else. B'dor shekulo chayavhu. The entire generation is guilty. She'ein adam b'dor hazeh shelo yilbash lubush hadomeh lelubush zkeneihem or lubush yaldehem. Whether it's adults or whether it's children, everybody dresses like everybody else. He says, and we know that we are a fundamentally religious and loyal population. So he's going with the sort of idea of the religious and moral and Jewish integrity of the people, and said if it were an issue, they wouldn't do it. That's basically it's an argument for minhag. And then he goes and says, if it were otherwise, then they should have been overly careful, because you're talking about the undermining of the integrity of the Jewish community by adapting globally and across the boards, adapting the Gentile ways. We have religious integrity, and what we do by intuition is this idea that custom is based on the sort of religious intuition of the Jewish community. By the way, that means that you have to. I mean, that doesn't mean that like Chilul Shabbos is a minig, right? You have to have fundamental, loyalty to halacha and the Torah. But anyways, but kal b'chomer ben kal b'chomer, all the more so sheyesh lav al mishiyus mochu migdel tivrei rabbeinu, that's mutter. Then he comes down and he really throws a bombshell, and he says, Jews don't have to dress different than anybody else. As long as it's not a quintessentially non-Jewish form of dress and lack of tzniut and lack of whatever that we consider criteria are, because we can assume that the Jews are not moved by an assimilationist motive. Now, that means that he's evaluating. Now understand, this is not Marik was not Italian. He was French. He was Ashkenazi. He had a very healthy tendency to be machmir like everybody else among the Ashkenazim. And he's looking at the world, at the Jews, and he's going, we got nothing to worry about in terms of the integrity and the loyalty of the Jewish community. It's really very striking. Now, there were Jews who converted, we said, and so on. That did happen. But overall, he says, I feel totally comfortable saying that you can dress like everybody else, not a problem. By the way, one of the things you see from this is that the Jew badge, at least at this stage in Italian Jewish history, was not enforced, because then you can get away, then you can do whatever you want, because if you're dressing like everybody else, but you're wearing a Jew badge, which the church was constantly trying to impose with not a lot of success, at least at this point in the second half of the 15th century. So you could say, well, what does it matter? I'm wearing well, they don't exist anymore. I'm going to date myself. I'm wearing a Brooks Brothers suit, but I've got a little, Jew badge on the pocket, so nobody's going to suspect that I'm trying to assimilate, right? In any event, I will add that there is that's how he evaluates the cultural, the psycho-cultural state of relation to the Jewish community and not. In other words, Jews and Christians are living together, and there's cultural back and forth, but there apparently is some kind of a psychological or emotional chasm, or at least a sense of boundaries, which is allowing for a sense of distance, which they are using. Okay, there is an interesting sidelight to this. This statement, "Eina Yisrael mechuyev l'shtanot min hagoy klal v'ikar," pops up not in the Middle Ages, but in the 19th century, because the maskilim in Eastern Europe and then other assimilations later on said, "See, we have." And by the way, the Ramah Paskins like this. It's explicitly in Kufay and Zion and Yoredeya. The Ramah Paskins like this Marik. In fact, this tshuva of Marik is the basics of the discussion. If you ever go into it's not relevant for us so much, but if you ever go into the whole discussion about can you celebrate Thanksgiving in the United States, so that this tshuva is the big point of discussion. There's a long tshuva of the Yisrael Yesh about this, or Reb Moshe. Anyways, in the 19th century, the maskilim were pushing and pushing and pushing. The Jews should dress like everybody else. And in fact, there was efforts by the Tsar, especially in the Behelov settlement, to force Jews to give up traditional Jewish dress and to dress in Western European mode. And there was huge opposition by the rabbis because of the assimilationist intent, and because they were trying to maintain themselves in the face of tremendous pressure, both from the maskilim and from the Russian government. And so the maskilim knew how to. They always knew how to pull out like one line from somewhere to wave and say, "See, halachically it's mutter," right? And seemingly very straight. So it's interesting. In the late 19th century, there was a Polish posek whose name was Avram Zev Frankel. I'm blanking on the name of the chuvas. Hold on, let me turn around. Meshiv Kalocha. And in Simon Zion there, he engages this question, and he says, "What about this Maharik?" So he writes at the end of the tshuva, he says, under the present circumstances, even Maharik would not have allowed dressing indistinguishably from non-Jews. Now, often Haredi, especially Haredi poskim, love to sit there and say, "Well, that was then, and he wouldn't have said it today," and in a lot of cases, it's really not true. But here, I'll swear it's absolutely true, because the dynamic in the 19th and 20th century was the absolute opposite of what was going on in Italy. Somebody's knocking at the door. I hope you give me 2 seconds, and I will be right back. Okay, we're back. All right. So the question that should be asked: what was responsible for the sense of distance? What was responsible for what helped to preserve this sense of Jewish integrity and apartness, if you want. Um, Especially since it's clear that there were many aspects of Renaissance society and Renaissance culture that were very attractive and that which almost forced themselves or certainly insinuated themselves into Jewish life. So here I want to one possible answer. Now there were a couple of ways of going about evaluating this. One way is to say that the Jews felt bad. They felt that they had to play catch up, that look at how wonderful the Christians are either saying, look how wonderful society we have, and we want, you see what you can do, you're inferior to us. So the Jews had to show that they could do anything you can do, I can do better. By the way, that was precisely, for example, the part of the psychological dynamic behind the so-called Golden Age in Spain. The Jews did not contribute all that much to Muslim society, but the Muslims in the 10th and 11th century and early 12th century in Spain basically made an explicit or sometimes implicit, sometimes explicit statement saying, look at all the things that we have. You guys are underdeveloped, and you should join us because we're the truth. We have a perfect language, and we have a perfect book, and we have a perfect and our language is superior to yours, and we have philosophy, and we have science. And the Jews responded apologetically, in other words, in self-defense. So that, yeah, all of the wonderful things that happened from a Jewish point of view during the Golden Age in Spain happened, but there was a defensiveness that was involved. So that's one element sometimes that often is involved, and it was involved here as well. However, in Italy, there was another element which was actually more constructive and actually more effective as a weapon or as a self-defense weapon than what went on in the Golden Age in Spain. And for here, I still, even though the theory that I'm about to give you is almost 50 years old, I still think it holds. And that was a theory that was put forth by actually my teacher, Professor Reuven Bonfil, and everything I've never seen. I've never seen. I've never encountered evidence to really what's the word, contradict it. So let's take a look. Number one, in the age of the Renaissance, believe it or not, the Jews expressed a sense of absolute superiority, culturally and nationally, as we'll see, towards the Christians. Okay, how is that possible? Number one, it is very possible that at least according to one theory, hold on, that the political and economic state of Italy at the time of the Renaissance in the 15th century was less stable than we thought. So in other words, there's this idea that there are historians, one of them is Roberto Sabatino Lopez, who was an old, who was actually passed away since, but he was a Genoan Jew. Roberto Sabatino was Shabtai, but then he went to Yale and became Bob Lopez. So people actually thought he was Hispanic, but Lopez means his family was from Spain. In any case, his idea was that there was a tremendous amount of turmoil in 15th century Italy, and certainly in early 16th century Italy, with wars and constant wars between the states and stuff like that. And the Jews were, looking at regular society and saying, these guys can't get along together. How, we have to live with them, but they're not, they're not the lords of the world. At the same time, how cultural efflorescence and political and economic crisis go together is an issue I can't go into right now. But it is true that at the same time as Italy was in turmoil all the time, except for a brief period about 30 years under Lorenzo de Medici and what's called the Peace of Lodi. One of the things which marked Renaissance culture, and we talked about this a few weeks ago, was humanism. In humanism, the entire remaking of all of European society and European culture was based on the adoration of the old, the restoration of Latin, the restoration of Greek, the restoration of Greece and Rome. Everything that was old, the older it was, the better it was. New is out, old is good. So the Jews, they're the oldest ones around. They're the oldest civilization around. And in fact, as we saw, the leading Christian intellectuals were coming to the Jews and say, teach us what you have. You have something we don't have. Please share it with us. Now that raises shilas and stuff, but the point was, from the point of view of the Jews, they need us. They're lacking something we have. And that just reinforces this idea that we are, that we're certainly not we're not inferior at all. And in the specific Hebrew context, they were very much aware of the fact that their basic works, especially the Bible, were written in Hebrew, and they didn't know Hebrew. And they began to mistrust the translations into Greek and into Latin of the Bible. So they sought out Hebrew scholars seeking out the Hebraica Veritas. So that even though this is a clash with Pauline, with Christian theology, that the Jews had lost their status as the chosen people and all this other stuff, there was this sort of idea that Jews preserved something that was still that we were more authentic. So, why would I want to be like them if I'm more authentic? You understand this approach by general culture, by the intellectuals, sort of reinforced this sort of a sense of superiority, and certainly of integrity and authenticity. One of the more interesting expressions of this is way before Madonna. One of the more interesting expressions of this is this in the search for ancient wisdoms, somebody let them know about Kabbalah. And they also went to Egypt looking for Hermetic sciences and all kinds of stuff. But you have this very odd phenomenon of Christian Kabbalah, where Christians are coming and studying Kabbalah. They're studying. This is the period in which the Zohar is beginning to. It hasn't been printed yet, but it's beginning to be beginning to be studied and copied in manuscript and translated into other languages. And Christians come and study Kabbalah with the Jews, and they're coming to us. Now, again, it's a shaila. Sitrei Torah, Goyim. All right, put that aside for a minute. Now, what did they want to learn Kabbalah for? Because they were convinced that all ancient wisdoms are going to prove Christianity. So it was a mixed bag. Let me put it this way: if the 10 sfirot, it's easy to turn the 10 sfirot into 3 sets of 3, which all become 1. So anybody who's known Christianity, it's easy to turn that into a Christian. Into Christian purposes. But the point was, as far as the Jews were concerned, we were desirable. We were the ones who were chased after, and therefore, like, we're superior. Why should we? Why that reinforced the sort of sense of we can, of our own integrity. In addition, Jews felt, even as Italy broke into little pieces and through the course of the 16th century, you have the Italian wars with European powers are coming in and taking over various parts of Italy. Italy really, at this point, really becomes what Metternich called, he said, Italien ist eine geografische Begriff. The Italy doesn't exist as a political entity. It's just it's a geographical expression. The Jews, on the other hand, during this time, apparently felt that they were actually superior to the Christians in this regard as well. They're all killing each other, and we're one people. This is expressed actually relatively late in 1579 in a tshuva by a Rav whose name was It looks like his name was Reb Zalman Fishkarol, but that's not his name. His name was Reb Zalman Pescarol. Well, pesca does mean fish, but anyways, Pescarol sounds a lot better than fish carol. Sounds like, fish carol sounds like he sells herring. Anyways, he's writing about the Jews approaching the emperor who was ruling parts of northern Italy as a group, and he says, "Me'ata shiftuna shiftuna hayad Hashem tiktzar milofia mimod kodsho al eza chared al dvaro lametz ra'ol lebilti aniach lechalel shem shamayim." We have a problem. We have to unite to be able to represent God and not have God's name denigrated or desecrated. Vatem kahal Hashem im bekoli tishma'u ta'amdu b'peretz al ha'avar v'al ha'oveh v'al ha'atid. We're going to take all the tenses together. L'chol ha'gzerot u'lahat'im zchuyoteihem el ha'moshel. We're all going to go together and fight for our rights. Ki shem Hashem nikra alechem. We are all equally Jews together. V'tiyu mezumanim b'kova'im yerukim. This is really stunning. This is the period of the Counter-Reformation. Jews are wearing yellow hats. Yarok and obviously Yarok in Hebrew in Mishnah Hebrew means yellow. They're wearing yellow hats. Likarei b'shem Yehudim. We're turning this into our uniform. Kilu kedei lishmoa b'kol Hashem v'torato. Kiken gazar gam hamelech Philippo, just as King Philip or Emperor Philip has said. Ubezel lo tishlechu yad b'nachlato and so on and so forth. Why? We are international movement. We transcend boundaries. We are everywhere. We are one everywhere. Nothing distinguishes between us. Then he makes an amazing statement. He says we are an international phenomenon, like the various mendicant and Catholic orders of priests. But the point here is that this assumption that we have a unity and hang together as a separate entity in Europe, which transcends boundaries and which is in marked contrast to the what's the word, not just disunity but the almost anarchy which obtains on the European scene. Okay. Now, in addition, excuse me. In addition, you have this very you have a little bit earlier. The question was raised. Okay, so we're one, and we're not. We're better than they are, but still, you were talking about us adapting things from the outside world. Isn't that a slap in the face of the Torah? Isn't that isn't the Torah self-sufficient? So he says something which actually Maimonides, he picks up on a theme, a medieval theme, which the Rambam himself mentions in the Moreh Nevuchim, where he tries to justify the study of philosophy. And a very prominent philosopher and thinker and biblical scholar whose name was Avraham Farisol, writes as follows. He says, we always had all of the sciences and all of the humanities. All of the sciences, Avraham Avinu. It all dates back to Abraham. Adon hapilosofim v'atochnim. He was the master, he was the founder of all philosophy and all astronomy and all celestial sciences. V'acharav kol haneviyim, it was all passed on later to the prophets. V'al kulam, and above them all, Moshe Rabbeinu alav shalom, Adon haneviyim. And there is an old famous story, a legend, that Plato learned philosophy from Moshe Rabbeinu. Now, Moshe Rabbeinu died 900 years, or no, not 900 years, 800 years before Plato. But all right, the numbers, the numbers. Who cares about that? Ulam says Ulam. However, this is really striking. Shelo kimo harambam. Okay, but in contrast to the Rambam, who wrote. Kiyata kasher avdu tovotenu rishei anshei ha'umot haschalot v'avdu chochmatenu v'chiburenu v'haimitu chachamenu at sheshavnu schalim. He says, even the Rambam had said, so therefore what he is doing in the Moreh Nevuchim is restoring the crown of Torah to its proper place by taking back the philosophy which we had lost and which was preserved actually by the non-Jews. Pharisal takes one step better. He said, "Nah, nachtiketok hayom hazeh b'sibat hagalut v'atatul lo nuchal להתעסק במושכלות וחוכמות. מכל מקום כולנו חכמים, כולנו נבונים מזולתנו." We may not have been able to occupy ourselves with the wisdoms which we've never really lost, but we're still a lot smarter than the goyim. Okay. The same thing. Well, the same thing is the same note is struck by Messer Leon, who we talked about, the same guy with the kappa. He had the distinction of writing the first Hebrew book that was published in his lifetime. The book was published in 1476. The name of the book is Nofet Sufim, which means the honeycomb, or the sweetness of the honeycomb. And the book is about rhetoric. Now, remember that in the Renaissance, the humanism started with this desire to restore Latin to its proper mode, and speaking properly and writing properly and declaiming properly and getting ideas across. Rhetoric is of course the science of, or the art of persuasion. Messerly and the two great authorities on rhetoric from the ancient world were Cicero and Quintilian. Cicero you've all heard of. Quintilian lived a little later. Now, Messer Leon wrote this book in Hebrew, in order to show, and he tried to show that there is nothing in the Bible, or that the Bible, the Tanakh, fully accords in its modes of self-expression with the highest standards of rhetoric as presented by Cicero and Quintilian. Okay, so then the question is, okay, very nice. So what do you do with that? So there are two ways of interpreting it. One way is, oh, it's another one of these catch-ups. Oh, see, anything you can do, I can do better. See, we can do just like you, except for one thing. And he says this explicitly in this introduction. We don't have time to read it inside. He says, Chevra, when did Cicero live? He lived in the 1st century BC. Quintilian lived after that. All of the tools and all of the modes and all of the height of rhetorical perfection were already present in the Torah, which predates all of you guys by hundreds and hundreds and by more than a millennium. So you got it from us. We didn't get it from you. I'm just going to show you that we have been doing it, maybe without knowing all these technical terms, but way before you even started to, it's sort of like, it's like a Disraeli's famous speech, when the honorable gentleman's ancestors were painting their bodies blue and hanging from the trees. My ancestors served in Solomon's temple, or whatever it was, because Disraeli, among other things, was also a Levi. Okay. Now, this gets even more striking. What is the role of the Jew in the world? So we have all this ancient wisdom, which everybody wants, which predates everything and anything that the Christians have. Therefore, we're more authentic. So for the first time, since Roman times, maybe it's got to do with Italy, I don't know. In the first time since the days of ancient Rome, all of a sudden, the hesitant attitude of Jews towards conversion changes. For example, the famous Jewish thinker and preacher Yehuda Moscato, who was the chief Jewish preacher in Mantova. Those of you, if you've ever seen one of the traditional editions of the Kuzari, excuse me, one of the traditional commentaries on the Kuzari is called the Kol Yehuda. It's by the same Yehuda Moscato. In one of his drushes, Okay. He says, in public, in Italian, Binyanam is more, whatever the is on the pasuk of Haloch Yelechu Hazor B'dima Barina Tzoru. Binyanam is more that capital Tilim. Remez atzum lizriata shel Yisrael bein ha'umot uvdei kochavim umazalot kedei shiyitvasfu aleihem gerim. Our job here is to bring the light to the non-Jews and convert them, because that's an upgrade culturally and religiously. All right, so unless you think that this is just a throwaway, all right, again, as we're reaching the end, so don't have time to read the whole thing inside. I will tell you what this is all about. In the first half of the 16th century, the leading halachic authority in Crete was a man whose name was Rabbi Liao Kapsali. Kapsali was part Greek, Romaniot, part Ashkenazi. He is best known as an historian. He's wrote one of the best-known works of Jewish historiography in the 16th century, and there were a bunch of them. But he was also posek. He studied in the yeshiva of Rabbi Yehuda Mintz in Padova, although he never studied with Rabbi Yehuda Mintz himself, because he got to Padova just before Rabbi Yehuda Mintz died in 1509. And he has a book, a wonderful book called Me'asharim. The book Me'asharim is this huge book on the mitzvah of kibbud av v'em, which was only relatively recently, only in the last 15, 20 years was finally published from manuscript. Okay. He was asked the following question. If a kid wants to get married, and the father objects to the chidduch, can he do the rules of kibbud av v'em, of honoring your parents or deferring to your parents, override the desire to marry the girl you want you to fall in love with? Based on actually a tshuva of Marik that he doesn't quote, but he clearly rips off. He says absolutely. It's not something which it's not within the purview of kibbud av v'em. You can marry whoever you want. You can marry whoever you want. And he brings a proof from, you ready for this? Samson. Samson? What was the deal with Samson? Samson went off and found himself a Canaanite girl, and his father said, "What? You can't find a nice Jewish girl. You have to go find you're sending me to go find you a shiksa." And he says, "I like her. Go get her for me." Okay? All right. Otakachli, he says, Kihi Yashra Be'enai. And you're sitting there reading this, going, what is he talking about? All right? And then look at the last words of the line. V'afal gav de goya haita. She was a shiksa. Chashab Shimshon legaira ulechach nisat tachat kanfei hashchina, kemo she'asta Ruth haMoaviyah v'Naamah ha'Amonit. And that was fine, and therefore the father went to go get the girl for her. In other words, it goes from, if the guy falls in love with a non-Jewish girl, what are you going to do? So you try to convert them because you want the Jewish family? No. This was his thought in the beginning. I'll find a nice non-Jewish girl, I'll convert her. That fills the part of the responsibility of the Jews in the world is to convert kama shioter non-Jews. Now that's first of all, in a society where if you convert a Jew to Christianity, if you convert a Christian to Judaism, you got to leave and go move to the Ottoman Empire because they're going to kill you. No joke. That's pretty daring. But the attitude of this is an attitude of superiority that is really quite striking. So coming back into it, how was it that all of these things were able to penetrate and be adapted by the Jews from the outside world? The answer is A, Jewish sense of superiority. B, that there's really nothing new here, because everything they have, we had before. And therefore it's restorative. Now, historically, is that true or not true? I can argue it, but this was their state of mind. And since there was this distance and this sense of superiority and the sense of authenticity and the fact that we will adapt whatever we're taking I'm emphasizing that, back to what we need, what our needs are, what's wrong? And that is precisely, and here we'll bring everything all the way back to the beginning, that is precisely the answer that Leo Modena gives to Salomone Rossi when he was posed the question, can I adapt madrigal music to the synagogue? And Modena says, why not? We had the music, we were masters of music in the Beit HaMikdash way before any of this stuff was cultivated by non-Jews. So we are simply being Machzir Atara B'Yoshna. And that now was part of the challenge. Why don't you have it? Whatever was there, offensive element, no question. But it could only come smoothly into the Jewish community when there was a sense of authenticity and so on. And I suggest to you that this is a barometer, that when the Jews feel confident and they feel that what they're doing is just restorative, there's a lot more openness to the outside world than when there's a sense of defensiveness and defense of inferiority and defense of fear of assimilation. Then you batten down the hatches. And I think I really think that's a permanent moment in the history of the interaction of the Torah with the outside world. But talk that another time. Anyways, I went
Thank you.
2 minutes over. Thank you
Thank you very much. Thank you for today, and thank you for the entire series of very interesting shiurim. You really taught us a lot, gave us a good understanding of Italian Jewry of the Renaissance, and I think there's a lot to learn from that and to look at ourselves in light of what we know about that. So thank you very, very much, and I hope that very soon we'll get to have you here physically in Ra'anana. And B'ezrat Hashem, we'll get it done. Okay. So thank you very, very much. Thank you. Bye. Bye.